申し上げていただきますけれども、while singing hymn, I will take special attack on enemy ship. I will go to heaven, but I worry about they let me in. So pray for me, Mom. All the means. All the means. I will go to heaven, where my mother will come someday later.
Thank you.
Before he read the diary entry, he just said that both he and his mother were Christians. And so I don't know if you caught all of it, but he said, I will sing a hymn as I make a special attack. I will go to heaven, but I don't know if they'll let me in. By any means, I will get to heaven where my mother will join me someday. So many of the the contradictions. Earlier today at Stanford, he was talking about how they were reading they were reading Nietzsche, and they were reading Dostoevsky, and they were listening to Bach and Beethoven, and that was the kind of education that they were used to, and that they would use these kinds of literary resources to try to grapple with the terrible fate that they had been burdened with. And actually there's a wonderful book written by the professor who's in the film, Emiko Nuki Tyranny, called Kamikaze Diaries, where she translates many of the diary entries of these young, very, very highly literate young men who went off and died.
I was wondering if the gentlemen could speak at schools in Japan about their experience, or whether they're still kept sort of below the radar.
We haven't started the grand tour of Japan yet. But let me just add one thing, which is that this film actually was theatrically released in Japan last summer, and it showed in a theater in Tokyo for 3 months. It went to 22 cities. The DVD is just coming out next week, and it was kind of a big deal all over Japan. So it got a big, and it's going to be broadcast on NHK, which is the equivalent of the BBC in Japan this summer. So it was kind of a big deal in Japan.
I was really affected by that, one of the pilots who sank the Drexler, I think Lieutenant Fuji or Fiji, Fuji, and how his wife with her children committed suicide so he could go. I mean, was that were there other cases like that? I mean, was that a kind of common sort of mode of thinking? And I just had a second part. The pine resin with the oil. That's pretty remarkable. Did they basically invent biodiesel then? Forerunners of that? I was just wondering if they could comment on that.
His answer to your first question is he thinks that there were people like that who volunteered to sacrifice. Especially because, as you understand, he was an officer. He was in a position where he had to send all his men off, but then he was like staying behind. And so he was in a terrible bind. With regard to the pine resin, I actually just recently read in a Japanese book how it was actually Kurosawa's screenplay writer, went up to the mountains to cry right after World War II, but there was no place to hide because all the trees had been cut down to get the pine resin during the war. So it wasn't just propaganda. They just leveled the country to try to squeeze every last ounce of whatever it was they could.
But that actually worked. I mean, a kind of biodiesel kind of.
ソリンはですね、オクタン価が100なんです。それで日本の、当時、使ってたガソリンはせいぜいオクタン価92です。特攻機がようやく92の、石油を全部の特攻機じゃありませんけど使いましたけど、訓練の時は、それこそ、松の、根の油を絞った、油を補給してやっておりまして、大体もう、80台の低いオクタン価でございますから、非常に、故障も多発し、飛行機の馬力もそれで弱めておりました。非常に日本は、敗戦の、原因は多々ありますけれども、一つの大きな、問題点はガソリンが非常に不足して、しかも品質が悪かったということだと思います。
American gasoline was 100% octane. Japanese gasoline, when they were lucky, was 92% octane. But when they were training, they were using 80% and below octane that had a lot of the pine resin stuff. So they were constantly crashing, and it was terrible for the engine. One of the big reasons, of course, why Japan lost the war was that they didn't have gasoline, and that it was very poor quality gasoline, and that led to accidents and crashes and destroyed engines.
Where do you learn the Japanese? As a diplomatic daughter, or?
My parents, who now reside in heaven, were missionaries. So my sisters and I, they sent us all to Japanese public schools. So we speak like natives. I guess we think like them too.
Well, I'm slightly biased, but I have to say that I feel tonight that this may be one of the most important films for the world and the planetary healing today. And I'm wondering how you are planning to distribute this film and really get it out of the world.
She's my sister, so she's very Well, actually, we're really excited because the truth is that in this country, if your movie has subtitles and it doesn't have penguins and it's a documentary, it's really hard to get a theatrical distributor because theatrical distributors want to make money and they feel that a movie like ours won't make money. But fortunately, we have wonderful true believers like Gary Mukai, who's with Spice of Stanford. And he's actually watched our movie now, believe it or not, 30 times, and we were able to get a grant from the U.S. Japan Foundation. So he's in the middle of writing a long teacher's guide, and we plan to sell our film to many, many, many universities and high schools, and we're going to go on a tour of various educational institutions, and we'll take these guys along as far as we can. But we really feel like we made the movie for 18-year-olds, because we want them to think twice and 3 times and 4 times before they go to war.
I just wanted to share a little story. Today we went to Stanford and Gary took us on a little tour. And for me, it's about distribution. It's about showing it to as many people as possible, but it's also touching the individual. And we went to this church and of course, Eugene had led the way and asked Ueshima-san and Ena-san to come along. And they went to the front of the altar, and Eugene was like, "Can we pray for peace?"
This is the part where Risa starts to cry. We take turns crying. Is that what you know, Eugene? Thank you. Can somebody get a picture of that, please?
We're going to have to wrap it up because we have another film coming into the house. But again, let's thank everyone for being here and for Risa and Linda for making